Mayor and Councilor, I will be going over a presentation, but really quick, under state statute, local communities are required to establish a maximum tax levy by the end of September. And the purpose of establishing that maximum tax levy is to provide a number that the county can send out in truth and taxation statements, which go out in early November to each individual tax owner to be able to indicate if the taxing jurisdiction, be it school district, county, city, were to establish a levy at this amount for the next year, what would be any change that you'd see in your actual individual tax situation. So it's preliminary in the nature that it's not the final budget or final levy that's chosen. That's actually done in December at the second meeting of December. The first meeting we actually have as our truth and taxation hearing, which is basically an opportunity for us to present our budget for next year, proposed tax levy, and then take any comments from the public, questions or things that they might have of that. So this is part of the process. Once we establish this levy tonight, it can go down but cannot go up after that. So that's sort of the stipulations that we need to play by. So I'm going to share my screen here. And boy.
I'm not on. Am I on video? It says start my video. No, I am.
Great. Trying to get to the presentation second.
While Matt's getting ready here, one thing I want to talk, I'll just kind of talk about is that this year we had a little different budget process where we really had, where we had options, different things. We've never had that type of thing. Generally, things have been going pretty well and we set our budget, but with all the craziness that COVID caused and things like that, this is the first time that we've really had an option to say, well, I think we really need to do that. And I think it's a good process, especially through this time that we're going through, is that ability to say, I think that that's important to our community, that I think we should have that. We had a lot of these discussions that we did in work sessions. This is the first time publicly televised that we will actually be discussing this budget. And again, like Matt said, this is where we picked the preliminary levy. We can't raise it after tonight, but we can always lower it. So, and then I'll let Matt go back into this discussion. So.
Long time.
Well, I had to do dead airspace there. I had to do something for you.
All right, so I have the presentation up here now. So first thing I'm going to talk about is just the items that we talked about during the 2020 budget year. And I think these are important. So this is the current budget year. So I think it's important to really understand the things we talked about during the 2020 budget session, because it really sort of leads into some of the decisions that need to be made during the 2021 budget establishment. So, you know, the three main things we talked about our annual projects to be funded through our capital improvement program. So as we have since 2017, we have $1 million that we set aside for our capital improvement programs to be able to go towards things like street overlays, seal coats, trail overlays, playground replacements, shelter replacements, anything that really has met its life and needs to get replaced. Continued utilization of our tax levy policy, which we'll talk about in a bit. And then also addressing plans or initiating a plan to address the findings of a staffing study. So if you remember last year, we did a staffing study, or we had completed it before last year, really indicating where our staffing needs were currently and any gaps that we had based on the services that we currently provide. And then also looking at planning for staffing as we go over the next 20 years. And the biggest issue that popped up out of that was really the staffing gap shortage we had for our current services. We identified 16 positions that we were short, and basically at the same time identified shortfall in our building maintenance activities. So dollars that actually go towards our building maintenance. And so last year we did adopt a plan to go through a 4-year process of basically fully funding that plan. We got through a little bit of the first year this year, and then COVID hit. And we did end up having to cut back on some of that. And then the discussion will be whether we think this is a time to continue to move forward or put a pause on it. So our budgeting objectives, so these are the most important things as we look at is, what do we want to accomplish through our budgeting process? Our budget document basically indicates our priorities in the community and what we want to put our dollars towards. So, supporting programs to help strengthen Chaska's mission of being the best small town in Minnesota. Looking at our existing tax levy policies, that we limit tax levy growth to capture only new growth in the community and expenditure inflations. That we'd only increase the levy beyond that point if new service levels or assets are being added. Maintain our existing high quality service levels, fully fund our maintenance and replacement of our vehicles, equipment, and physical assets on a regular schedule so that we ensure sustainability of our investments already made. Fund new programs only after existing necessary programs are funded. Budget to utilizing a plan to avoid drawdowns in our city's general fund reserves. Fully fund levy needs of our street reconstruction program, and then develop a long-term budget plan that is sustainable from a resource perspective to support the service levels residents expect. So the big thing to talk about this year is really the environment in which we are budgeting. So 2020, again, I think it's important to look at this because 2020 was something we started out the beginning of the year thinking one thing, and then almost instantaneously within about 3 months, we realized it was going to be something different. So the COVID pandemic crisis obviously started in mid-March and had an immediate impact on our revenues. The most dramatic impact that we've seen are really in our recreational enterprise funds of the community center and the Curling Event Center, primarily because we had to have those closed down for about a 5-month period. Actually, coincidentally, and John's here, our golf courses actually have done very well this year, as many golf courses as people I think have stayed closer to home and looked for outside type of entertainment. It also had an impact on our general fund revenues, including our administration fees from the enterprise funds, our building permits, some taxes, so a number of different revenue sources. And so based on those changes on July 6th, we did have the council act on adopting an amendment to our 2020 budget, which basically reduced our expenditures by about $750,000, reducing our CIP program by about $275,000, our plan positions and staffing plan implementation by $380,000. We reduced some special events and then just a multitude of other things like conferences, education, travel, those types of things. So again, $750,000. The budget environment factors that we look at this year, first of all, our market value increases have really begun to slow in 2021. If you look back at the history from 2015 to 19, with the exception of 2016 where we saw a lower increase, all of our increases have been over 5% as far as market value growth. 2020, we're seeing an overall increase of 2.8%, with a 1.8% of that coming from new growth. And that's important to know because that sort of fits into our policy, is looking at that new growth in the community. 2021 is the first year we have a certified $0 amount from LGA. got down to pretty low, but this is the first time it's nothing. Our administrative fees from enterprise funds have been impacted. So, we've seen some hits of less electric usage, although this year was a very hot year, so some of that got mitigated. But we also saw that, funds like our community center and Burlington that were closed for several months were not able to contribute as much in administrative fees to help support those general administrative services. And our building permits have slowed over the past year. It's been pretty steady from a residential perspective. We've seen pretty steady residential built really for the last 12 plus months, larger type of although that could change next year out there, but given the uncertainty of the market, it's hard to plan around those items. So this chart gives a breakdown of the basically all of the different categories and shows on the bottom right-hand corner the 2.8% total increase that we saw in market values, and the new growth is just a couple columns or a couple of cells above that is the 1.8%. You can see apartments saw the greatest amount of increase in the community, and it was really sort of a mixture between some of the new construction that was built a couple of years ago just coming online, and then also some market change, which sort of fits what we're seeing is that there's pretty low vacancies in apartments in the community and in a lot of suburban apartments, and so we'd expect to see a little bit more robust growth in there. This is our distribution of market values in the community. We have a real good mix. So we have 75% is residential, but we do have 12% that's commercial industrial, 7% that's apartment. And the ag is really sort of that undeveloped property in the community that's still left to develop. The residential since last year has increased in its share of the pie. I think when we see the full development of the community, you'll see that balance out a lot more because we do have a rather large industrial park on the west end of the community that will be part of future development. This gives a graph of the, just sort of looking back from 2006. So this would be pre-recession to projecting out into over the 5-year period. But one thing that I had pointed out a few years ago is that it took practically 8 years to recover all the lost market value growth that we saw during the course of the Great Recession. But we have seen steady increases, but those increases have slowed recently. We project 2% over the next 5 years just to try to be conservative, although our average over the last 5 years has been 5.51%, but most of that growth came actually before the growth for this year. Another thing to point out is, the difference between 2020 for what we're seeing for next year compared to this year. So last year we saw a 9.7% increase in our tax capacity. This year we're seeing a 3.01% increase in our tax capacity. So that means that our resources are not growing as fast as they did last year.
So in that, we're basing that on just the overall what was built within the city, correct?
Yeah. So it also gets into what type of growth we saw in actual existing market values too. So the growth in existing market values wasn't very robust either.
And a lot of that has to do with that we had no industrial growth at all, probably in the last couple of years, really.
Certainly on the new growth side of it, that impacted it. For the existing, not so much, but yeah, definitely on the new growth side of it. And then this gives you sort of a sense of, I put this, I think it's important to understand the context of why I put this in. I put this in because I think one thing to understand is that even during times like the recession, we saw new growth happening in the community. So we've never not seen some new growth in the community. And these are even during times when we saw market values actually going negative overall. We saw new growth. And I think it's important to understand that we really need to at least make sure that we're picking up for that new growth coming in the community, because it's making sure that as that new market value is coming online, that we're bringing that into the mix so that new property in the community is contributing to the overall service levels that we provide. If we don't do that, then it ends up sort of spreading really more burden across everybody else within sort of the whole scheme of things. Local government aid, again, we are seeing officially $0 for 2021. Some of the history of this, I mean, you can see going back to 2003, we're at a little over $1 million, and that went away. We did get that back up to about $500,000 back in 2014 and 15, but then that did get cut in half. Or cut pretty significantly, created a $250,000 budget in our budget in 2018. So at that point, we did levy back half of that to try to mitigate some of the From a building permit perspective, like I said before, we've seen real steady building permit activity. We've seen less on the commercial industrial side. And what that's really had an impact on is you see really in that period from 2010, so that would have been when we saw the hospital and the data center sort of come online. Ever since then, we've seen building permit numbers really be above sort of that $800,000 per year, and a lot of times over $1 million per year. We've really, with really seeing mostly single-family residential development over the last year to two, we've really seen a good chunk of those building permits go away. As part of the 2020 budget amendment process we did back in July, we actually reduced that revenue amount by $300,000 because we realized that some things were not going to be going forward because of COVID. And we've really sort of adjusted it over our 5-year period just because of the volatility of planning for these commercial industrial projects. It becomes really tough if you plan for one and then it doesn't happen. It can have a pretty dramatic impact on the revenues that we actually collect in our general. I always like to just sort of show that our population continues to climb. 2021, so we can see we're just over 27,000. These are the estimates we've done internal. I went back and I looked at the Met Council estimates, and they're pretty darn close to this. They were like 27,300. It's something like that. So we've kept pretty close to what we're projecting, but obviously this year is a census year. So we'll be getting sort of another baseline coming up, likely in 2022, of where we stand for a population. So we talk about our franchise fee or our electric fund transfer to our general fund, which represents a 10% transfer. This is one area that we've seen pretty robust growth. And really where we've seen this is we've seen both the increase that we've seen from, especially like data centers and things like that have come into the community over the past several years. But also we've seen our existing industrial park, we've seen businesses continue to expand out there. And with that, we've seen electric loads continue to increase. So this has been something that has been a positive. Like I said before, we saw some decrease in actual business activity in 2020, not a lot, but it was mostly offset by the fact that this was a really hot year. And so there was quite a bit of electric use that occurred, especially during the summer months. So some of the discussion items that we looked at in our 2 work sessions and we'll talk about tonight. You know, the first slide really talks about some of the things that really are sort of, you know, things that sort of come forward from what we talked about in our 2020 budget and things that we've planned for multiple years. So, first one's continued utilization of our tax levy policy. Again, our tax levy policy basically says that we'll limit tax levy growth to capture only new growth in the community and then any expenditure inflations. And then we only increase the levy beyond this point if a new service level or assets being added, and we'd actually add the actual cost of that new service to the actual levy that we're contemplating. The CIP program, so again, since 2017, we've funded that at $1 million. We have seen an impact on revenue loss, and we'll talk about this impact that we could have in 2021 with being able to fully implement that. As a reminder, you know, back in July, we did cut back about $275,000 of our CIP and did not get the whole thing completed this year. And then staffing study implementation and the impact of the economy on timing of implementation. So again, we implemented the staffing study last year. We first focused on our greatest need, which is our building maintenance needs, and we're able to get 3 building maintenance people funded for this last year, which that's our first 3 building maintenance people that we've had in the city. And with all the facilities that we have really become important positions. And then we're also able to sort of put in place the first 1/4 of our dollars towards actual building maintenance, which we were able to keep in the budget for this year. But there was some components of the staffing study that we did have to cut back on in July just because of revenue shortfalls. And then the other 2 that I want to talk about tonight that I think are important to talk about as we look at 2021, because they're issues that have really sort of, or items that have really come up over the past year that you know, really have impacts on our budget if we want to address them. So the first one is needs identified in our recent policing review. So, you know, some of the things we'll talk about is the shortage of a sergeant position in our patrol area. And then also, you know, things that have come up through the policing review about different types of trainings that we'd like to be able to offer for our police officers, such as 40-hour de-escalation and crisis intervention training. And then also, really what we think is an issue that's becoming bigger in the community is the increased use of narcotics in the community, and really needing to re-engage with the West Metro Drug Task Force to be able to utilize regional, contribute and utilize to a regional task force in addressing these issues. And then the second one is needs identified in our recent financial rating review to really look at how we make sure that we implement a policy to increase our general fund balance. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. So from an operational tax levy policy perspective, you know, we talked about the things that impact that, so new growth and then inflation, and then only increase in the levy beyond that if we're adding a new service. For 2020, the new growth is 1.85% with inflation running at 1.68%. So based on that policy, would say that we'd increase our levy by 3.53%, and that by doing that, we should theoretically be able to accomplish meeting all sort of those base objectives that were already in place, not taking consideration new programs like staffing study or things like that. So if we did increase our levy at 3.53%, that would increase our tax capacity by 3.03%. So that's sort of just the baseline. The second thing to talk about is our capital improvement program. So again, we worked for 4 years to fully implement that program. So between 2014 and 2017, we implemented $250,000 each year of additional revenue into the budget to really fund $1 million gap that had been identified prior to that, to be able to reinvest back into our facilities. So this is anything from the condition of our roads to the condition of our trails, and opportunities to run around the community today. And driving down Yellow Brick Road, if you drive down that now, it has new pavement surface. If you drive down in Cortina Woods has new pavement surface. The trail behind Cub Foods, across the street from Hazeltine, used to be in terrible condition. Now it's all brand new surfaces there. So really trying to keep up with those things that are out there. One thing that has become an issue as we've looked at our 2021 budget is if we were to, because of the changes that we've seen in little growth in market value and decreases of admin fees, things like that, that if we were to fund our budget at the baseline level, that we would be short on our capital improvement program. And so what that would mean is we'd be about $300,000 short. So what that mean is we'd either have to cut out $300,000 of our capital improvements, just like we did in 2020 this year with a mid-year budget adjustment, or we'd need to find a way to levy for those additional dollars to be able to make that program whole for 2021. So that'll be one of the discussions that we talk about in this. The staffing study implementation, again, the staffing study was completed by Baker Tilly, our financial advisor, and identified a current gap of 16 employees across the city. That was approximately a $1.5 million gap, along with approximately $500,000 gap in building maintenance dollars. And so during the 2020 budget cycle, so last December or last fall, the council did decide to move forward with implementing this study, but decided to do it over a 4-year period. So what that meant is addressing $500,000 per year for 4 years, with $375,000 coming from tax levy and $125,000 coming from our enterprise funds. In our first year, we were able to fill 3 of our building maintenance positions and keep the $125,000 in to support the building maintenance activities, but we did need to delay the remainder of the program, which was approximately $100,000. Specifically, I believe it was a human resources position that we did delay as part of that. So re-implementing this plan in 2021 would require us to follow through with the second year of the plan, which we'd need to levy an additional $375,000 as part of this program. And it's really the decision about, do we think this is the right economic climate to do this, or do we think that this is something that we should be putting a hold on until the economic climate gets better? So that's another discussion item. Next one is the newly identified issues in police. So again, this came from our community conversations that we've really had over the course of the summer, starting back in late June. And then actually they're continuing with letters that we've sent out to residents asking for their input on our policing services. Really, we've been going through that whole sort of public engagement process over the course of the entire summer. The immediate issues that we've identified as part of that is, first of all, the need to have additional supervision during most of our scheduled shifts. And I'll get into more of the details so that makes sense. A need to re-engage in the West Metro Drug Task Force, and then a need to provide additional training to our officers to be able to have greater skill set towards de-escalation of situations and crisis intervention, And part of that is also giving the tools to the officers to be able to have information. So things like a vitals app. So, something that provides self-reported information from individuals that may have situations that if you responded to their home, if you knew that there were certain trigger points or things that could cause issues, might change the officer's approach towards how they actually come into that situation or home. So those types of things. These are the areas that really we sort of see as areas that are growth areas and but also become really potential liabilities if we don't take proactive steps. Funding these identified needs would require an additional $100,000 in the budget. A little bit more detail on the police staffing and training. So right now, really in the staffing side of it, the biggest gap that we see, well, we see a gap in patrol. So we've been at the same levels of minimum coverage since 2001 in the community, where our minimum levels in the community are 2 officers, 1 in the north side of town and 1 in the south side of town, which is pretty thin. But what complicates it is that we also don't have supervision or a sergeant position on each of our shifts that we have out there. So direct line supervisors are really responsible for the actions of the officers, training, monitoring, addressing issues and complaints early so that they don't become a big issue, addressing use of force issues immediately, ensuring consistency, all those things that you expect a supervisor to do when they're really out in the field. Right now, we're currently able to supervise or provide supervision on 55% of our shifts. Really, at some point in time, we really should be aiming that we have supervision on 100% of our shifts. It's something we have not been able to afford to do, but by bringing 1 additional person on, we'd be up to 70% of our shifts having direct line supervision on there, which we think brings us a long way in that. The review also identified needs with training to be provided to all the sworn officers, including one that our chief feels is really important. I agree, is 40-hour crisis intervention training and other training that really sort of addresses those de-escalation tactics and less than lethal methods to deal with critical incidents. And like I mentioned before, also getting back into utilizing tools like the Vitals app that can provide us with very useful information. And then I had mentioned before, really the need that have been identified to get back involved in the West Metro Drug Task Force. This has been a growing issue within our community the past few years. And I think that probably the most concerning part of this issue is that it really appears that people are choosing to do some activity in Chaska because we don't have this participation in this task force that puts those resources in place. So it makes it easier potentially for them to get away with things in our community. In 2019, just a statistic here, 55 total narcotics investigations happened in Carver County. Chaska represented 24 of these active cases. So there is a greater need than those 24 cases we've had in the community. But these are really the only ones that the task force would address because they had a broader impact on the communities around us and not just on Chaska. So it's one of those, if we don't participate financially or if we don't participate with an officer, it's really hard to expect to get any services back from the task force to be able to be able to address those issues. So we're we are currently one of the only cities in Carver County that does not participate, and one of the few in sort of the Southwest Metro, and even getting across the county into the river into Scott County that does not participate. Ideally, what we do is we'd have one officer that we actually put into a rotation with this task force to have them participate in it. We are not at a staffing level that we can afford to do that now and not have pretty dramatic impacts on our patrol. But what we can do is sort of a first step to get into this until we get to the right staffing levels is financially contribute. And the financial contribution to start and be a member of this is actually relatively low. It's $8,400 per year, and one that we think is a good investment for us to get back into. Next thing is our general fund balance initiative. So during the financial rating process this year, in preparation to sell bonds, Standards & Poor's, who is our rating agency, they did reaffirm our AA rating, which is great. Our AA rating has, we actually received back in 2006. We actually went up 2 notches in 2006 immediately to get up to that AA rating, and has had a pretty dramatic impact on the interest rates that we've been able to get. One of the things that's always been pointed out as something that S&P would like to see change with the city of Chaska is overall we have really good financial position, and a big part of that is because we have an electric utility, we have our utilities, we have things that diversify our income in the city of Chaska that a lot of cities don't have. And so, generally in the city, most of their revenue generation and their expenditures are coming through the general fund. And so, S&P or whatever rating agency they use will look at the reserves that they have in their general fund balance and say, well, we think you should have 25 or 30% reserves to be able, sort of the rainy day, in case you don't get in income as expected, so that you have some reserves there. They've never been as strict with us on that because we have such a diversification of revenues. But with the COVID crisis that came this year, they started getting a lot more strict, saying, no, even though you have this diverse pool of income in the city, we want you to focus exclusively on your general fund. Your general fund needs to have a higher reserve balance than it does, because we don't want you to look at the other assets you have in the community. We want you to focus on just your general fund, because that's what, when we're doing a taxable or a tax levy supported debt issuance, they want to make sure that we have the ability to be able to fund those. So they kept our AA rating, but basically gave us a warning saying you need to address your general fund reserve balance in a meaningful way to be able to keep your rating the way it is. And that becomes a really big deal for us, because the AA rating is a really good rating for a city, especially for a growing city like ours, where we do a lot of projects, we bond for a lot of things because we are growing and have a lot of expenses out there. In the last bond sale that we saw a few weeks ago, we did a refunding issuance, and just because of our AA rating, we saw a $1.8 million savings on our debt. So having that type of rating has a huge impact on being able to save costs. So I'll talk a little bit more about some of the analysis our financial advisor did to look at, well, what happens if you don't address that? What are the actual dollars you can expect for increased costs, which makes it so what we're recommending for this year is that we address it by putting levying $100,000 from in the general fund, and then putting $200,000 in from our enterprise fund process to start this process. And this is something that we just have to continue. This is something that we just have to look at each year and continue to build that up. You'll see us also come back with a policy to be able to address, for instance, so like next year with our building permits, we budgeted $600,000 for building permits. But if we see larger projects go forward, like the one out at Oak Ridge Development, we could see in excess of $1 million of building permit revenue over the course of the year. Really talking about how do we take those additional revenue dollars that we get that are above and beyond what we budget, and what portion of those do we put back into helping build up our general fund reserves. So those types of issues. So you'll see a policy come back this year. Some other items to consider. This is a contract year for all of our unions, but we really sort of follow with our unions and non-unions sort of the same policy. We budgeted for a 1.5% increase in wages, down from the 3% that we had shown before. really because we're just not seeing that growth in wages across the board in communities because of where we are economically. We did have the equipment replacement bonded for in 2020, which included our 21 equipment, so that's already been taken care of. We did, even if we don't go forward with the 2021 implementation of the second year of the staffing study, we kept the $125,000 of building maintenance dollars in there so we can continue to reinvest back into the buildings and really want to try to keep service levels as constant as possible in the general fund. So like I had mentioned before, if we did our base level increase, we'd still keep the same service levels, but where we'd see the gap is in a reduction in our capital improvement program by $300,000. So like the mayor said, we sort of took a different approach this year because of the just the different issues that we're seeing around revenue shortages, and really looked at different options that we could consider for this year and the financial impact that that would have if we were to implement those. So option number one, I call this a base plan. So this would be if we kept our tax levy policy and we said we're only going to levy for new growth and inflation, which would be at that 3.53%. Again, historically, that should be able to cover all of our baseline services, but because we've seen revenue shortfalls in the different areas I mentioned, the impact that we'd have for 2021 if we implemented just this plan is that we would not see $300,000 of our CIP program. So we'd still, the priority we give in our CIP program is street replacement or surface replacement, and then also trail pavement replacement. So we'd still get those things done, but we'd really lose sort of those other items like park replacements, shelter replacements, those types of things. We would not implement the staffing study, second year of that, under this scenario, and then we also would not address any of the police or fund balance issues that were brought forward. If we did that by itself, you can see we look at a median value home in the community as sort of the comparison. So we use this as an example. I mean, obviously, people's homes are valued at different values. So what the impact is on and on their valuation, but also then on how much of an increase or potential decrease that they saw in their tax market value. Our median value home in 2020 was $281,000. In 2021, that's $285,000. And so you can see the example or the taxes on this example home would go up by $1.75 per month or $21 annually to be able to fund this base level. So our percent of increase that we'd see for levy would be it'd be the 3.53%. So option number two is, and I did put these in order, right? You'll hear me say that I actually think option number three of dealing with our general fund reserve is a lot more important than anything. But I put the CIP second because one of our objectives in our budgeting is that we fund fully fund existing programs before we fund new programs. Dealing with our general fund reserves is actually a new program. CIP is a program that's been in place since 2017. So I put it first, although I'd actually make the argument that option three, dealing with that, is probably more important. So the CIP program, again, we're short $300,000 if we go with just our base tax levy increase. So we'd need to increase our levy by $300,000 to be able to accomplish this. And if we did this, obviously we do our baseline, we get our CIP, but we would not address the staffing study implementation, nor would we address the police or fund balance issues that I discussed. And you can see on that same example home that it'd be $3.83 per month would be the increased costs that the median value home would have in the community. And then the levy would actually go up by 4.03%. Option number, I think it says 3 in there. Yep, option number 3. This is really looking at what if we address our baseline, add the $300,000 for the CIP, and then address the fund balance issue. So again, the fund balance issue, I think is, I'll show some numbers, and I know you guys have seen it, but the public hasn't seen them. To me, this is a no-brainer to deal with, because really what we're talking about is how do we keep our debt that we sell in the future as inexpensive as possible. And what we don't address in here is going to come back in the future and haunt us with potentially higher costs when we go out and we actually build new infrastructure. So you can see in this option number 3, we would fund the CIP. We would also fund the fund balance initiative for this year, which would be $100,000 being levied and $200,000 coming from the enterprise fund. The things that we would not fund under this option would be the second year of the staffing study implementation, along with not addressing the police issues that have been identified. And you can see under this scenario that for the median value home, the cost per month would go up $4.58 per month. And then the tax levy would go up 5.08%. Option number 4 is really taking those options and then looking at also addressing our police study and some of the things that came out of that. So as I mentioned before, there's a $100,000 cost in implementing that. That would be for one new officer, which would be a sergeant in patrol that would start on July 1st. So we would have that be a mid-year start. And then re-engaging in the West Metro Drug Task Force, providing additional training to officers, and also getting re-engaged in things like the Vitals app. Under this scenario, the only thing we would not fund is the staffing study and building maintenance implementation, the second year of that. And you can see that the median value home to address these issues, it'd be $5.33 per month, which would be a 6.13% tax levy increase. And then finally, the staffing study. Second year of the staffing study really would address, I think there was 4 additional positions that came in under this. One was a human resources technician. One was an economic development. I think we had another building maintenance position, and I think it was a water and sewer employee. But then also would fund an additional $125,000 that would go towards additional dollars towards our building maintenance needs. If we did this, obviously this is the last option. We would be funding everything that we're looking at as far as issues or options this year. And then here you can see on the median value home that the impact would be $8.08 per month, or a 10.23% increase. Some things I think are really important for us to consider as we go through this is, this is a difficult year. There's no doubt that, this has been a difficult one to navigate, but I think we have to really keep in mind that there are short-term things that we can do to address some of the budget shortfalls, but we also have to keep in mind that we don't fall too far behind too. Especially on things like our building maintenance and our capital improvement program. We have a number of city facility needs that we've been talking about for the last 2 years that are going to be coming up, such as our city hall, our MSB, our police department. We completed the space needs study and we showed that to you last November. We have a lot of space needs that exist, and buildings that quite frankly are just not in very good condition that need to be addressed. We've talked about the new library. Obviously we're putting that on hold now because of where things are at in the economy, but that's something that we've talked about as a priority. And under our system, cities are responsible for the building, and then the counties are responsible for the operations. And then, again, we need to be careful that we're not falling too far behind in our plans, especially with the capital improvement program, because Every year that we fall behind in that, we're just pushing everything out one more year, which has a cumulative effect as we look over time. And in some cases, really impacts like on street life. In order to have street life be maintained, we really need to seal coat a street every 10 years, and we need to overlay it over every 20 years. And so if we follow that schedule, a street should last 70 to 80 years. But if you don't keep up that schedule, you might miss sort of that third cycle of just maintenance activities, which are quite a bit cheaper than replacing a road, which over time costs us more money. Now the good news is that we've always provided very good value for the dollars that are spent in Chaska. This is a list of, it's not a list of all the cities because I couldn't fit them on there, but it lists the rankings of 86 municipalities in the metropolitan area, and shows where, this shows what would happen if we implemented option 4. So that was the option where we re-implement or fully funded the CIP program, we addressed the fund balance reserves, and then we also addressed the police issues. So that's saying, what if we were to fund that and we looked at the tax levy from every other city from last year? So this would assume that no other city saw an increase in their taxes, and we assumed our increase going on option 4. So you can see even with that, Chaska is still in the top 10 lowest cities of tax levies per capita at $412. The thing that I think is important to point out is that it doesn't really change our ranking that much from last year. If we did option 1, which is just our baseline option, we'd be in position number 80 instead of 79. So whatever option we choose, even if it was the greatest option, really still puts us within that top 10 lowest tax levy per capita in the metro area. I throw in the surrounding cities just to give some perspective. To me, it's tough with Carver and Victoria because they're developing cities and they have to build infrastructure before development is there. And so to make that comparison, I think is a little unfair. But I do think we're a very comparable city to Chanhassen. And, they have higher valuation in their community, so their tax rate is lower, but their tax levy, what people actually pay is quite a bit higher. And so you can see that that's at $446 per capita, with their tax levy being about $500,000 more. Chaska's. I guess one thing I'll also point out is, we've had very good value for our tax dollars in Chaska for a very long time. We've been in this ranking like this for probably the past 25 years. So we've always really provided, or for a long time, provided a really good value for services. I think it's important to point out that, if our 2020 tax levy, if we use the same tax levy per capita in 2020 as Chanhassen, we could have added another $950,000 to our budget. And Chanhassen's is not high. Chanhassen isn't even at the midpoint. If we assume a 2.5% increase in Chanhassen's, which it sounds like that's what they're sort of looking at, we could add on a $1.25 million onto our tax levy, and we'd still be, right there with Chanhassen, but below sort of that midpoint of cities that are out there. So the only reason I put this out there is it's hard to put in context for people when you say, well, this is what it's going to cost. But it's also, I think, important to say, well, what should it be? What sort of the typical city out there is seeing for their tax levies. I'm going to sort of skip through a couple of these and just to show some data. So on the, you'll remember at the second work session, one of the things that we did is we came back and provided some data to say, well, what if we didn't address some of these issues? What would pop up as the actual issues? The general fund reserve balance was the first one we addressed. We did have our financial advisors at Baker Tilly go through and look at our prior 12 months issued of debt service, and then took that to project what we would expect to see for issuance of debt over the next 5 years, and then said over the life of that debt, what would happen if we went down one notch for our rating, and what would happen if we went down 2 notches. So you can see if we went down 1 notch, the city would go from a AA to a AA minus. Over the life of that debt, that would cost $846,900. If we went down 2 notches, which back in December of 2006, we actually went up 2 notches. So that was sort of the jump that we saw then. The increased cost of that debt over the maturity of it would be $1.8 million. So, it's just important. I think it's important to see those because it really illustrates that investing in that and keeping those reserves up and keeping that rating the same or going higher is really important as we look at the costs that we have, especially being a developing community.
Matt, going back to that, can you touch a little bit? You and I have talked about that, about other cities being AAA rated, but you always talked about how we probably wouldn't get too much higher because of how we do things around here.
Well, it'd be unusual for a developing city to be at a AAA, and primarily because we have so many things that we have to issue debt for. Now, some cities will choose to not issue debt, and that they'll only do things if they have cash. And it's not issuing debt. It's easier to keep a higher tax or a higher rating because you're just not taking on as much risk. For the city of Chaska, having a AA rating, given the amount of activity that we have, is pretty good. Because you look at the amount of activity that we have, and we're going to continue to have in Southwest Chaska as we need to put in roads and infrastructure. For us to do that on a cash basis really would mean that we're taking the assets or the money that our current residents have been paying over the last 20 years and funding something that's going to impact people that are going 20 years into the future. And so, it's a philosophy that we've used that really it's those future users that should be paying for those instead of the people that have been here in the past and had money collected and then now have that money to use, put towards something that they may not actually use. So I mean, it depends on the philosophy of the city, but it's certainly easier to keep a higher rating if you're not doing much issuance. Impacts on the not doing the CIP program. If you remember, we had Brian Jung, our public works director, in here, and it's not hard for him to talk about the importance of the capital improvement program because he's ultimately the one that's responsible for keeping things in good shape. I already talked about our street rehab and how we really need to have a 10 and 20 year schedule for seal coating and overlay to really get the full life out of our streets. And so it's more than just having a good surface to drive on. It's also about how do you keep intact the stuff that's under the road that you don't see for as long as possible so that you're able to do just an overlay and not have to do a full reconstruction. Trail rehab, one of the things I think that a lot of people probably do not realize, but it's a huge asset in our community, is we have 75 miles of paved trails in Chaska, which is huge. And a trail needs to be resurfaced every 20 years to stay safe. Prior to implementing our CIP program, we had enough money in our budget to be able to resurface 1 mile of trail per year. So it would have taken 75 years under that scenario to be able to replace all that. We bumped that up to 3 miles per year when we implemented the CIP program. So that's still once every 25 years. So it's not ideal, but it really improved our ability to be able to go out and keep those trails in good conditions. And like I said, I use the trails a ton, and it's very noticeable, the areas that aren't done and the ones that do get done. It's a real important thing for us to do, and it is I think sometimes sort of underappreciated. I think people very much appreciate the trails, but sort of forget that that's an amenity that not all cities have, 75 miles of paved trails. Our park and playground rehab. So the biggest issue that we have with that is both, some of our developments that are up for replacement of playground equipment, some of this equipment is 30 years old. And so it deteriorates over time and becomes a risk for us not to replace or to do substantial work in because the parts just deteriorate. But the other issue is that back when a lot of these playground systems were put in, there was no ADA laws. And so we need to be able to show that while we can't afford to go out and make every one of our parks ADA accessible all at once, we need to be able to show that we have a plan in place, that we're taking those off our list one at a time so that we stay compliant with that. We need to show that we're making progress towards that. When we don't, that's when we really open up liability issues. Our building rehab, this one I think probably goes without saying because I think all of you guys have seen some of the building conditions that we have. City Hall is a really good example. The City Hall is, it was opened in 1987, so that's 33 years ago. And so there hasn't been a ton of stuff that's been done on City Hall since it's been open. And now things are starting to fail. So we have things like chillers or roofs or things like that that really need to be taken care of. Stormwater rehab and our ravine system. So we're sort of cursed and blessed to have a ravine system here in town. It's great for sewer, to put in sewer lines. It's great for trail sections because you can have trail sections that go through wooded areas. But it does make our stormwater issues significantly more than other communities. And so being able to go out and address those issues that pop up with stormwater before they become an issue. And then we have a lot of issues like, rehab of retaining walls. I think Brian showed a picture of the one across behind Cooper's here on the clay hole that needed to get replaced this year that was completely failing. We have one down in I call it the Patrons parking lot, which is actually ours, that's failing on the west end of that. Our parking lots need to get replaced, surfaces. So there's a lot of things that our CIP program encompasses. And then the policing issues, again, this was something that Chief Seibert came last week and really sort of gave his perspective, which I thought was really good because he also comes in with a perspective from another community where there are some things they did and some things they didn't do, and he could see the benefits and things that didn't work out so good with the things that they haven't done. First of all, with the shortage on supervision, again, we only have 55% of our shifts now that are covered. This would bring it up to 70 to have one additional one. And it really, to me, this is sort of one of those that kills two birds with one stone. We have needs in patrol. So we have needs to be able to have more officers on patrol out in the field. But at the same time, we need to be able to have more direct line supervision out there so that there's somebody that is able to provide mentoring, able to deal with issues as they pop up. If somebody's stuck in the office, they can deal with those, with more of those administrative things, but they're not dealing with those issues in the field. And those things become really critical to deal with. So I thought Chief Seibert did a good job of sort of talking about what you typically see for a structure and most effective structure for police departments and why having that direct line supervision ends up really getting to a lot of those things like accountability within our police department. And then obviously he talked a lot about the training that he'd like to see each of the sworn officers go through with the 40-hour crisis intervention training, the impact of getting back involved in the West Metro Drug Task Force. So, you know, a lot of things trying to support why, you know, a lot of things that came up during the community conversations were really things that there are ways that we can address this. And he's really spent some time reviewing that. So as I started the presentation, I said that this is really sort of the first step in the budgeting process this year. You know, we did have a couple of work sessions back on August 31st and September 14th where you guys had a chance to look through this. Today, because this is the last time you guys meet in September, is the day that you'd have to set the maximum tax levy for the year. And as we get into October, and November, we'll start looking at our enterprise fund budgets. We come back on December 7th for our annual Truth and Taxation hearing, and then on the 21st, we'll be considering the adoption of the 2021 budgets and establish the final tax levy. One thing, well, a couple things I'll point out. First of all, Nate and Kevin and I talked pretty extensively today about sort of the strategy that we're going to be using to help communicate some of this stuff out. And we're looking at doing sort of short segments, Facebook size segments that can go out to talk about each one of the different components that we're talking about here, so that people not only understand what's being discussed, but also the whys behind things. So we're going to be doing an interview with myself and with Brian Jung and with the chief, and really go through and help to educate people on why we're looking at these things and what the council is going to be considering, but then also talking about what does that mean for the overall impact on taxes and people's budgets. So that's going to occur. We're going to start that process this Friday. So we're over the next several weeks, what will happen is you'll see an interview taped on Friday, and then it'll come out on Monday. And so it's going to be Friday, Monday sort of schedule here as we go through the fall. I think we had 4 scheduled for the general fund, which will take us up to about the 3rd week in October, which is right before the Truth and Taxation statements come out. And then we'll also then be doing the enterprise fund budgets after that, which will take us up to establishing the budget in December. So that's one piece of it. The second piece is you'll see in the staff report, the recommendation I wrote was basically based on sort of listening to the conversation you guys had. The tax levy that is represented in the recommendation is assuming option 4. So that's assuming doing the base levy, addressing general fund reserves or CIP, and then the policing issues, and talked about the discussion that you guys had, that really the policing issues are ones that you still wanted to continue to have discussions on along with the others, but really have some more focus on that. So that's what you see in the staff report. Obviously, you guys can set that at whatever amount you want to, but that's where the recommendation is. Any questions?
All right, questions for Matt, conversations?
We've discussed this quite a bit in the past, couple work sessions. So we asked a lot of questions of Matt and staff. So, I feel pretty comfortable with at least setting for, at least right now, going with option 4 as we kind of talk through it. I think that there's it's one of those things that I'm always reluctant to look at, tax increases whenever, we can, because, it's one of those things, it's money's tight for everybody, right? But that said, it's also important to make sure that we maintain the value of the rest of the assets. We make sure that we maintain the quality of our community. We have to keep up with things, and all these things are investments in maintaining the quality of the community and our ability to maintain it moving forward. So, it's one of those things where there's a tremendous amount of worth in what's being done as far as taxes. So, but it's also something that's necessary to be done. So that way we're not paying the price by kicking the can down the road for future years that we'll be playing catch up later in some other way, and it'll be much more costly at a later time. So to me, I look at, all those things we discussed as investments in ensuring that the quality of services we have in Chaska, the quality of our roads, quality of our trail systems, the quality of their ability to do projects and fund projects at a best value, which is something that we pride ourselves on. Those are things that we've, like in the funding part, is something we've earned that rating from Standard & Poor's over the course of years and lots of investments. So to lose that would be, tremendously detrimental to our ability to conduct projects in the future, and to be able to ensure we have a safe community. Those are, really critical things that we need to make sure we keep our eye on the ball. So with that, I'm very much, in support of, that option 4 at this point.
I agree. Sorry, I gotta go because I'm louder. Yeah, I think I agree. Some of them have real obvious financial impacts that would eventually cost our residents more. And then some don't, but I think they all really come to a point where they're really, I think, important to kind of keep moving forward with. To, again, not cost ourselves more in the future, but to also make sure we're not just talking the talk, but walking the walk, so to say, as well, with some of the objectives and things we've put into place ahead of now. So I think option 4 is the one.
I won't repeat so many of the same things on option 1, 2, and 3 that makes sense. I mean, to me, option 5 was kind of off the table for me. Just when I look at, as much as I recognize that staffing is important, we're down, 13 based on the staffing study. The current economic climate doesn't tell us that we should be staffing right now. I mean, there's a lot of people who, in organizations, who aren't able to staff and contracting to some degree. So it just doesn't seem like option 5 to add the staffing piece for me makes sense in the current climate, in the current environment, and it's not consistent to what's happening around us. So, I agree with the comments on, the option 1, 2, and 3 with the funding and the CIP. But I just want to, to me, option 5 really wasn't really on the table ever for me personally, just because I just think it's not a consistent message to tell our taxpayers when that's not what's happening outside or and around us. There's not a lot of hiring. I wish there was, but there's just not a lot of hiring right now. And I think Councilmember Hatfield pointed out that when we had the opportunity to look at that plan last year, there was a 4-year plan and a 5-year plan. We elected to do the 4-year plan, and by kind of bumping it down the year, now we're just kind of changing our mind and saying we're going to do the 5-year plan. And I think that's consistent as well. And we'll see what next year brings as well. But who knows? So.
I heard the other council members in regards to feeling comfortable going with option 4. It was difficult to kind of get there, just as some other council members had mentioned in regards to just the economic climate and some people really hurting economically and maybe others not as much, but with what is being proposed, it makes sense. Planning for the new growth and inflation, having funding with the CIP along with the general fund balance. Those are all kind of smart moves. The policing, I kind of looked at that and thought, I think that that's a great idea. It sounds like we'll be hearing more details about it, but I just, based on the community conversations and action and move the ball forward in regards to maybe making some changes or, just in the vitals apps in regards to the policing. I also appreciate the communications piece. I think that that's kind of the missing link to this now, that we're going to put this out there. And I think it's great that you guys are putting it forward to put it out to the public, so then we can hear the feedback and kind of be able to see where people are at and have those conversations. I feel like that's a great thing. So.
Matt, what was it to move for, what was option 3 per month versus option 4? I never write that down. You got that?
Or three
Option
pieces.
4 is 533, and I think option
458.
yeah, it's 458 per month for option 3, and it's 553 per month for option 4.
553,
Yep.
basically $1 more.
Yeah, it's like 80 cents more, I think.
Is it 533?
Yeah.
Was it 533?
Yeah, I think it's 533. That's what I
Okay.
wrote down.
I didn't think it was $1 either. Okay. All right. Well, I per month.
Yep.
Okay. To me, 1, 2, and 3 are a must. There's no doubt about those three. I think that we've talked about the CIP for a long, long time, the importance of keeping, we were so far behind in street maintenance and a lot of maintenance that we're really good about building things, but not really good about up with things. And we made that determination years ago that we need to keep that, and to cut into that now would just be a setback for us as we move forward, because we're in COVID, but that doesn't change anything as far as the maintenance that we need to do. Very happy that we were able to get the 3 new building officials on, because I know that they have been a huge help in trying to get some of that maintenance that we have been lacking for years. The financial piece about getting our fund balance up to keep our ratings are huge. It's not about not being able to do projects. We would do the projects, but we would just pay a lot more to do them. And I think that that's critical, that we need to keep that. Option 4, there are some, like Councilmember Gra talked about, adding option 5 just isn't the right message about adding staff at this point. And that is, I do have some concerns about that, but the importance of the education piece that the officers need, and entering back in with the drug task force, hearing that we are now the place to come and to deal with more drug issues, that is very concerning for me. And I know, if we put it off, that just adds another year and we can have more. And I just think that it's important that we have to get back into that. And like I said, as far as adding the officer, we're really not adding until June, so it's only a partial year. But I think the rest of it's so important that we have to have it, and we learned that. We went out and asked the community what we need, and the de-escalation training is some of the stuff that was important. And I think it's important that, we follow through what we went out and asked for it. Now we got to follow through with it. Unfortunately, everybody has to pay for it, but with everything we do nowadays, someone has to pay for it. So at that point, I can support option 4 with, like I said, I've shared my concerns about it, but I think it's important that 2 of the 3 things are very important, that we make sure that we get that taken care of as we move forward. So I don't know, anyone else have anything to add, or Matt, anything we're missing?
The only thing else I'd mention is that when we look at our comparison to other communities, and I don't know what's represented in the, whether the communities are including their EDA and their other funds in there. When we look all in. So when you're looking at that 11,413,137, that's our general fund, that's our Mount Pleasant Cemetery, that's our EDA, and then all of our tax abatement projects. So it's all in with everything. It's not just looking at our general fund. So it's, I guess, another important thing to point out, that we're actually supporting more than just our general fund when we're setting that levy.
And one thing that we're fortunate to have is a utility company. And as Matt said, we had a year that was pretty warm, so a lot of air conditioning going on. 10% of those funds go in toward our general fund, so that helps offset that. So even though you're paying more money, you're paying a lot of money for electricity, but we get, we get rebated it back. Let's just call it that for.
And I think the benefit we get as residents is three things: is you're paying less for your electricity than you would with Excel. You're getting more reliable service because the people who are serving you live right here and the community can respond quick. And then we get that 10% contribution to the general fund, which keeps our taxes lower.
So, like I said, while I struggle with any increases, I know during the 2010 when I got in there, I know we talked about that, how challenging it was to do anything with taxes, and we did nothing. We stayed at zero increases. And looking back at that now, I kind of wish that we would have done at least a 1 or 2%. And I know we don't do percentages, but just for lack of a better term, to had some increases there, just to keep things. And I mean, well, part of me says it was the right thing to do because that was very, very challenging. We can't sit idly for 4 years and do nothing and not expect to pay for it somewhere down the line. So I've been through both sides of this now, and like I said, I don't like seeing raising our taxes to $5.33 a month. But learning what I've learned through this process is that I think it's important that we do make these that we have to do these 4 items to keep the city on a forward pace. So, anyone else? I'm not hearing anything with that. I'm going to throw it out then. If we are done with discussion, again, before I ask for a motion to approve, would be adopting resolution 2020-80. Just again for the public, that we've had multiple work sessions regarding the budget. It seems like that we're only spent, let me see, we've been here an hour and a half. It seems like it's like we haven't spent a lot of time when we're setting our budget, but we have spent a lot of time. Staff has put a tremendous amount of time. They've been working on it since COVID hit in June about how we're going to try to get through this. We all have concerns about what's going to happen in the 2022 budget moving forward, but we got to get through 2021 before we worry about 2022. So like I said, I just want to be clear that we've spent a lot of time about this. We've had a lot of questions, and a lot of questions have been answered. The questions that haven't been answered have been found out, and we came back and did that. This is unique this year that we were able to have the ability to pick options, and I think it was a good way this year. It gives the council more direction on what they feel is important to have done. And like I said, we had a lengthy discussion against council, and that's why we came up with choosing option 4. So I just want to be clear to everyone at home that this isn't this isn't just a quick, hastily decision, that we've had a lot of conversations regarding that. So again, if there are no comments, I would entertain a motion to approve 2020-80.
So to adopt resolution 2020-80.
Was that a motion? I'm sorry.
Yes.
Yep. So motion by Councilmember Wong. Second was that Hubbard. So I have a second by Councilmember Hubbard. Again, adopting 2020-80, which establishes a preliminary tax levy for taxes payable 2021. And again, this is the maximum. We can't go any higher, but it can go lower if something changes through the process. So it will not be any higher than the $533 per month on the average house. So, all right, discussion. Hearing none. Councilmember Grau.
Yes.
Councilmember Hubbard.
Yes.
Councilmember Wong.
Aye.
Councilmember Hatfield.
Yes.
Mayor Winchell. Yes. Passes 5-0.